Have you ever found yourself just utterly exhausted? Like completely drained from fighting to keep a relationship alive? We've all been there. You hold on so tightly, hoping that if you just try a little bit harder, things will finally click. But what if that resistance you're feeling isn't a test of your endurance at all? What if it's actually a sign to walk away? Okay, let's jump right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're unpacking a really fascinating spiritual perspective from the YouTube channel Faith Applied. We're breaking down 5 specific spiritual signs that indicate a relationship might actually be facing divine redirection. This isn't about just giving up when things get hard. It's about recognizing when holding on is literally doing more damage than letting go. Society constantly feeds us this message pretty much from the time we're kids. Real love requires sacrifice. If it's valuable, you always fight for it. You push through the struggle. I mean, it sounds incredibly romantic, right? But the spiritual perspective we're looking at today directly challenges that narrative. It argues that actually, not every relationship is meant to be fought for. In fact, it suggests that sometimes what feels like the devastating loss of someone is a form of divine protection. God is protecting you from losing yourself. It is a massive paradigm shift. You're moving from, I have to fight for this, to I am being protected from this. So how do we actually know the difference? Well, let's look at sign 1, the loss of inner peace. According to the source, this is usually the very first warning sign that pops up, and ironically, it's the one we ignore the most. It rarely shows up as a massive, dramatic argument or instant chaos. Instead, it's more like a quiet, unexplainable discomfort. It's a persistent feeling that something is just off, even when everything on the surface looks completely fine. You might try to justify it or tell yourself you're just overthinking, but deep down, your spirit feels totally unsettled. To ground this idea, the explainer points to a foundational scripture, Colossians 3:15. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. This isn't just a comforting platitude. It's presented as a highly functional, practical metric for your life. The idea is that God's peace is the ultimate indicator of whether a relationship is aligned with your life's purpose or severely misaligned. If the peace is missing, a core foundation of the relationship is missing. And there's actually a brilliant metaphor for exactly how this peace functions. Consider the definition of the word rule from that scripture. In its original Greek origin, the word literally translates to an umpire or a spiritual referee, someone who makes the final call in a game. The source uses this incredible analogy. God's peace acts as your spiritual referee. When the peace is there, the referee is signaling that you're in bounds and safe. But when that peace totally disappears, the umpire is blowing the whistle, signaling that something is out of bounds or wrong. The problem is we constantly misinterpret our own feelings. We so often confuse the emotional intensity of anxiety for excitement, and we mistake confusion for passion. We think that roller coaster feeling means it's real love, but according to this spiritual framework, divine presence doesn't produce confusion. It produces calm, assurance, and peace. You can have crazy chemistry, a long history, and intense attraction with someone, but if it's the right connection, peace tends to follow. If it's the wrong one, well, peace is usually the very first thing to leave the room.
Okay, which brings us to sign 2, closed doors and warnings.
This sign dives into what happens when you try to move a relationship forward, but you are just constantly met with roadblocks. So what does a blocked path actually look like in everyday life? The source lists several super relatable frustrations. You make plans together and they constantly fall apart. You try to have an important, clarifying conversation and boom, it instantly turns into a massive misunderstanding. You try to take the next step, but obstacles just keep popping up over and over. Now, it's totally normal for relationships to have struggles, for sure. But the key takeaway here is recognizing the huge difference between a normal, healthy relationship challenge and a path that is fundamentally being blocked. The explainer anchors this whole concept in Proverbs 16:9. In their hearts, humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps. The deep insight here is that God doesn't promise to support every single plan we make. He promises to guide our steps. And sometimes, that guidance leads you away from someone, not toward them. When a door closes, a lot of people think it's a test of faith, so they push harder and pray longer. But pushing harder against a locked door isn't necessarily faith. The source suggests that your overwhelming exhaustion from trying to make it work might just be your spirit finally realizing you're fighting against divine protection. Let's move along to sign 3, losing faith and ignoring wise voices. Now, this is the sign that usually triggers our defensiveness the most. It happens when the trusted people around us, the ones who truly know us best, start sounding the alarm, and we absolutely do not want to hear it. The source references Proverbs 11:14 to explain this dynamic, where there is no guidance, a people falls, but in an abundance of counselors, there is safety. From this perspective, the concerns raised by your family, your close friends, or your mentors, They aren't attacks on your relationship. Rather, these people are acting as instruments of safety. Maybe your family sees a pattern of disrespect. Maybe your friends notice an emotional distance. When multiple, trustworthy people who genuinely love you start noticing the exact same warning signs, the source advises that it might not be a coincidence. It's likely confirmation. So, the absolutely crucial takeaway here is this. Relationships aren't built on potential. They are built on patterns. You are not dating someone's future possibilities. You are dating their present choices. We so often fall into the trap of minimizing current bad behavior because we're just completely focused on who the person could become. But relying on potential instead of observing actual patterns is a major red flag in this spiritual framework.
And that flows directly into sign 4, slowly losing yourself. The source describes this as a deeply dangerous sign because it rarely happens overnight. It's incredibly subtle. It happens through these small, gradual compromises that cause you to shrink emotionally and spiritually over time. The analysis uses 2 Corinthians 6:14, what fellowship can light have with darkness? And it uses it not to judge the other person, but to help you recognize the direction of your own life. Are you stopping your spiritual practices because it makes them uncomfortable? Are you distancing yourself from friends just to avoid conflict? The message here is loud and clear. The right relationship should strengthen your faith and support your growth. The person meant for you will never require you to minimize your beliefs or hide your true self just to keep the peace. If your connection to yourself and your faith has declined, the relationship itself might literally be the reason why.
Finally, we arrive at sign 5, feeling deeply alone together. The explainer notes that this is perhaps the most heartbreaking sign of all, yet it's also one of the clearest indicators. It's that severe emotional distance where you feel entirely unseen, unheard, and completely indifferent to, even while sitting right next to your partner. Think about the biblical ideal from Ecclesiastes 4:9-10. Two are better than one if either of them falls, one can help the other up. Love is supposed to provide connection, safety, and comfort. But what happens when the person who is supposed to catch you becomes the very source of your emotional collapse? Loneliness inside a relationship can actually feel so much worse than just being alone by yourself. The source offers a really striking thought here. Sometimes God allows this intense, painful loneliness to wake you up. He allows the emptiness to become so apparent so you can finally recognize that staying is costing you far more than leaving ever would. And that leads straight into this incredibly comforting resolution. Better single and emotionally whole than attached and spiritually broken. When a relationship is removed from your life, it isn't necessarily about taking something away from you as a punishment. Most often, it's about clearing out the damage and preparing space for something much healthier. So let's see how all of this builds into our final section, redirection toward better futures. If you've recognized any of these signs in your own life today, the advice is not to panic. Just pause and reflect. We really need to shift our perspective from seeing a spiritual no as a punishment and instead see it as a loving rescue. This final scriptural anchor, Jeremiah 29:11, reminds us, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to give you hope and a future." The ultimate takeaway from this explainer is that divine mercy doesn't always look like instant happiness. Sometimes divine protection actually looks like separation. Sometimes his love looks like removal. And sometimes mercy looks like heartbreak today so that you can experience true healing tomorrow. A closed door is simply protection from a future you cannot see yet. So I want to leave you with this final provocative question to reflect on. Is God's no trying to protect a future you cannot see yet? If you are feeling the exhaustion of a forced relationship, if your peace has totally disappeared and if the doors just keep closing, consider the possibility that you aren't being abandoned. You're actually being redirected toward the future you were designed for. Take some time to look at the patterns, listen to that spiritual umpire in your heart, and ask yourself if it's time to finally let go.